Welcome to Crossroads. On Crossroads, we're looking at the evolving relationship between Armenia and the European Union. We call the program Crossroads because Armenia is at a turning point in its modern history. How will it balance the powerful forces at work in the Caucasus? Which friends, allies, civilizational values will it choose? It cannot be denied that there are very difficult choices to be made in the face of considerable uncertainty in the world. And today, to talk about these things, I'm delighted to welcome Sossi Tatikyan on Crossroads. Sossi Tatikyan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for the invitation.
Sossi, you were a diplomat. You represented Armenia in NATO and at the International Atomic Energy Agency. You worked for the OSCE. You worked at the United Nations. You coordinated projects for the UNDP and Freedom House. And there's more.
And EU, by the way, EU too.
And you coordinated projects for the EU. That I didn't know. You have a master's degree from the Kennedy School, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, I think is the complete name.
Yes.
And you've got a number of other degrees. You've also been NATO Defense College. You've been at the NATO Defense College Partnership for Peace research. And of course, you're currently doing research, a PhD research at the Sorbonne Nouvelle University in Paris with support from the Gulbenkian Foundation. Generally speaking, you're an expert on security, on international relations issues. You write quite a lot. I'll be referencing an article you wrote back in May on EU-Armenia relations that I've been relying a little bit on to prepare this interview. And I think you're going to tell us a little bit about an article that's about to come out on EVN tomorrow. So more about that shortly in the interview. So I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to discuss Armenia and the EU with you, Sossi. So to start with, let's paint the general picture of relations. This interview comes at a very active period in Armenia EU relations, and there's a lot of news. Of course, this program was put on the road, started because of this law, or following the adoption of this law in Armenia, that decides that Armenia is going to join the EU in very general terms. But there's also been a lot going on since then, and let me mention a few of them to get you started. We are expecting a major agreement between Armenia and the EU that is called the New Partnership Agenda. We're also expecting a visa liberalization between Armenia and the EU. At the beginning of October, the Armenian Prime Minister took part in the summit of the European Political Community that was in Copenhagen. There's also been another big shindig, as they say, about the global gateway. That's the European response to China's Silk routes. And more recently, there's been a European conference to discuss a Black Sea strategy. And of course, the EU has announced that it will contribute to Trump's road through the south of Armenia. So that would also be a major contribution that has yet to materialize. So I've thrown a lot of pieces of the puzzle there on the table. Are all these separate pieces of news, Sossi? Or can you help us look at the bigger picture? What is which direction are Armenia-EU relations taking, and how does each of these pieces of news contribute to a broader plan, or do they?
Thank you very much, Nicola. And if you noticed, by a pure coincidence or a strategic coincidence, my article is named very similarly to your podcast, because it's called EU-Armenia relations at a crossroads between normative values and pragmatism. But when I was naming it like that in May, I had no idea that you have a new podcast with the similar name.
So you know what they say about great minds.
Exactly. So what you presented is very important developments, the overview of very important developments in Armenia-EU relations, but not even the whole picture, because there is another small piece, small but super important piece in the security field, which is, first of all, the European Union mission in Armenia. And today, they already have at the moment 200 members, and they have already fulfilled several thousand patrols. And the second is first measure for European Peace Facility that was approved. Unfortunately, the second measure was vetoed, not vetoed, but prevented by Hungary, and it has been now more than a year. And then within this new partnership dialogue, etc., in July, when High Representative for Foreign and Policy, Kaja Kallas, visited Armenia, Armenian Foreign Minister, and she also signed this agreement according to which Armenia can actually take part in common defense and security policy missions in other countries as a partner country. And there is also this strategic dialogue on defense and security issues. So this security element is also very important. But whatever you said, I just agree with everything. And let's look at Armenia's EU membership aspirations, because many people don't understand how serious are those aspirations or how realistic are those aspirations, and it's a bit confusing. So actually it was a grassroots initiative to begin with, which is very good actually, because it shows that in Armenia there is a significant amount of people, civil society, who are aspiring at EU membership, and they gathered these signatures, and then it was enough in order to put it in the parliament. There was this bill that was approved in the parliament in April, and it was signed by the president of the country. And then for a while it seemed that nothing was happening because some expected that Armenia is going to immediately apply for EU membership officially, but it wasn't done until now. And it caused some dissatisfaction and skepticism amongst those circles in Armenia and also in Europe who are, I would call them, radical pro-EU or radical pro-Western groups. Because, you know, if you look at Armenian society, you have this pro-Western but more pragmatic, kind of centric civil society expert community, to which I myself consider myself belonging. Then there are those very radical pro-Western, pro-European groups who think that the government is not credible in terms of EU membership aspirations, and it's just pretending that it wants to be an EU member, but in the reality it's just doing everything to please Moscow, and it's just hedging from Russia, and it's never gonna really apply for EU membership aspirations, and they don't trust the government. And then there is this parliamentary opposition which is getting more and more active before elections, which is basically pro-Russian, conservative opposition that completely mocks this EU membership aspirations agenda. They think that EU has let us down, that it has created this instability in Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova, and it's now doing the same thing with Armenia, and that Armenia can never be an EU member, and if it does, it's against Armenians' interests, and Russia is the only saver or the only reliable partner. And you cannot really understand the correlation of those people in the society, but in the last two surveys of International Republic Institute of the United States, which is considered the most reliable public survey in Armenia, EU membership aspirations gathered very significant support.
You mentioned 61% pro-EU, right?
I thought it was 51. I may be wrong because my memory is not so perfect, but as far as I remember, it was 51, which is already very good. But then what is a bit disturbing is that this was not the last survey, but this was the previous one. In the last one, it was 49, so 2% less. And this is entirely the consequence of the current hybrid warfare intensified before elections. So it also can be explained. So we can analyze what the government really wants. Does it really want EU membership? And this question is asked a lot to the government. And basically what they explain is the following. As of now, the Foreign Minister Mirzoyan has stated 2 days ago, they can submit an application, formal application to the EU in a month or in a year. So it's not certain. There is no timeline in the bill, or there is no decision about the timeline. Why? Because first of all, we are facing elections and very complicated hybrid warfare environment. And this kind of application now can actually intensify the risks of hybrid risks, in particular by Russia. The second is that we are still far away from the EU standards, and we don't want to be ridiculous. We need to do our homework. Homework means Copenhagen criteria. We need to fulfill the EU criteria, which is not at all an easy process. It takes many years for any candidate country to reach those criteria.
We've had quite a discussion on Crossroads with Armenian about this. Go on, please go on.
Yeah, and so we are committed to do the homework, to do the reforms, to meet those criteria. But it's going to take years. You know, like we are behind even Georgia in that sense. Politically, we are now much more democratic than Georgia because they had a decline in democracy. However, in terms of compliance of national legislation, Moldova or Georgia have already reached very certain standards. I'm not even talking about Balkan countries because they have been candidates forever. And even them, they are often criticized by the EU for not having reached standards in certain areas. So we need years of work to do.
I hear you. If you don't mind interrupting you at this point, I hear you, and that's, as I say, that's the argument that Armenian put to us. So Armenia has to do its homework, right? It's going to be a long road. We first need the association agreement and so on. But there are all other variables, which incidentally you mention in your May article, and the other variables have to do with the Russian threat. So Russia, when Armenia announced, I mean, when the law was adopted the beginning of last year, this year, sorry, Russia reacted very negatively. So there is a fear of Russian reaction, but there is also the actual objective problem of the incompatibility between the Eurasian market and the European Union's single market. You just cannot be part of both, and that's also already going to be a problem with the association agreement. And Armenia and Russia continues to be an important trading partner for Armenia. The EU's importance, I believe, is increasing, but Russia has an important. So there's all kinds of obstacles that I think mean that the Armenian government wants to remain in this zone of ambiguity until the dangers are past, until its relationship maybe with Russia and hopefully with Azerbaijan are stabilized. And
Yes.
in your article, you point to a number of solutions.
You see, first of all, when you talk about association agreement, I don't think that's even on the agenda, because I think we have passed this stage when it failed, unfortunately, in 2013 under the Russian pressure, change of mind of our previous government. So now we are talking about new partnership agenda. We are not talking about a new association agreement, because that's kind of a stage that I don't think we need now. And this new partnership agenda has been approved, and it's moving forward. There is a lot happening, a lot of high-level visits to Armenia. Just like in July, it was Kaja Kallas. In September, it was Marta Kos. And by the way, as a civil society representative, I was involved in both meetings with them, and those meetings were very good, very substantive, very receptive, and very encouraging and positive. Returning to Eurasian Economic Union, yeah, this is a huge problem indeed, because our economy still has institutional structural dependence, both on Russia bilaterally and also on Eurasian Economic Union institutionally. And yes, Eurasian Economic Union is a customs union in the same way as European Union, which means that you cannot be a member of two incompatible rival custom unions. So we absolutely need to exit the Eurasian Economic Union in order to be an EU even candidate, not even a member. And for that, it's tricky, because if we do it prematurely, our economy may just collapse, and we may just face a very, very tricky situation in terms of our economy.
And Armenia would have a transition phase where it's already out of the Eurasian Union, Economic Union, and not yet inside the European single market. And that's a very dangerous.
Yes, and by the way, this period may last for many years, and the other thing is that even if we fulfill all the Copenhagen and every criteria, there is no any guarantee that we will actually become a member of EU, because at the end of the day, after fulfilling all the standards, it's a political decision. If only one country doesn't approve it in a national referendum, then we cannot be a member. So there are two questions here. The first is that Armenian authorities have adopted a very pragmatic approach. They are saying that, okay, we will do our internal reforms, institutional reforms, to meet EU criteria, and we will apply eventually. And if EU accepts us, great, we will be very happy. If it doesn't, okay, it's not a tragedy, because then we will have completed our internal work, our homework, and we will win anyway. So it's a win-win situation in a way that we will approve our standards in institutional reforms, in economy, etc., because EU standards are high and very good. And of course, there is a certain nervousness by Armenians in general, because we are not sure that EU is going to accept us, and nobody can give us an answer. EU Secretariat, External Action Service people, even the highest official cannot tell us whether EU is going to accept us at the end of the day, even as a candidate or not, because it's up to all EU member countries and their parliaments to decide. Only one country can block it. So this is a very ambiguous process, and that's why Armenian authorities, also given the lessons learned from Ukraine, Georgia, we saw what happened with Georgia. There was a decline in democracy, and there was this also deterioration of Georgia-EU relations, and now, EU is withdrawing its assistance, its support for Georgia. Ukraine, we saw that it was more about NATO membership than EU membership. However, it caused a Russian nervous reaction, too nervous, and we saw that it turned into a horrible tragedy and a war. And in Moldova, less so, because so far Moldova is a good case, and it gives us a lot of encouragement, because if Moldova had the same scenario as in Georgia during elections, I think it would be very discouraging for Armenia. But it was really great that Moldova succeeded to conduct democratic elections and pro-European forces won there. So it gives us some optimism that we can do the same in our elections, which are just months away. And here there is this second question that we're discussing about economy. So we need to diversify our economy gradually to reduce our dependence on Russia and Eurasian Economic Union. And we are doing it by very different ways. First of all, EU can help us greatly, and I think they are trying to help us to create opportunities for Armenians to export their products to the EU, licensing, different quotas, etc. Second thing is that it's not only about EU. US is helping us a lot with diversification of our energy dependency on Russia and economy in general. The third, finally, we are actually diversifying our economy not only towards the West, but towards the East, towards Asia, China, India, Gulf countries, and
I saw the main destination of Armenian exports now are the United Arab Emirates.
And that's great, because it's a very developed country with a very big market. And I think it's very positive that we have such an intensive trade with United Arab Emirates. And now we have also signed very recently in September strategic partnership cooperation with China. So our trade with China is developing. We have also cooperation with India. And all of this is going to help to diversify our economy and reduce our dependency on Russia and Eurasian Economic Union.
Yes. So we're talking about China, we're talking about India, the European Union, Russia. That justifies our motto, right? Crossroads. The Armenia really is the crossroads.
Because we are geographically, we don't even know in which continent we are. When I'm asked whether Armenia is in Europe, I don't know what to answer, because we are right at the crossroad of Eastern Europe, Eastern Southern Europe, and Western Asia and Middle East. So, and our geographical position has been our vulnerability for a very long time due to our conflict situation with Azerbaijan and the lack of diplomatic relations with Turkey, and our being in economic blockade for 30 plus years. But if we manage to make Washington Accords concluded in August, brokered by President Trump, and if we manage to deblock communications, then there is a much more opportunity to become to make this vulnerability as an opportunity, because we are at the crossroads. So we can basically become an important transit country, maybe even a hub. It will require a lot of work. It's gonna face a lot of obstacles. Of course, there are going to be countries that are not going to be happy and that are going to prevent us. But as you see, our government has been very proactive. So it's doing its best to deblock communications, to resolve all the conflicts, to normalize relations. And because all of that is creating opportunities for Armenia's development, prosperity, which are also uh, very important factors for EU membership aspirations.
I'd like to take this opportunity to come back to the new partnership agenda. You said there's going to be, we've passed the stage of the association agreement, and we're now on to the new partnership agenda. You also said it has been negotiated, but it hasn't been published yet. So tell us, what is the status of this partnership agenda? How is it different from the agreements, the kind of agreements we already know, and what's going to be in it, if you know?
Well, I mean, I'm not personally involved in it, so I just know what is more or less public. But it was basically approved. I mean, in March 25, the parties had completed approximately 15 rounds of negotiations, which means that by now it should be much more. And the agenda covers 6 thematic areas: democracy and governance, freedom, mobility and security, foreign and security policy, economic and sectoral cooperation, trade and trade-related issues, and people-to-people contacts. And its goals include strengthening legal and democratic institutions, enhancing cooperation in migration and organized crime, promoting regional normalization, improving connectivity and energy security, harmonizing trade regulations with EU standards, and strengthening academic, cultural, and youth exchanges. So, and you know, now when the US is a different country under Trump's administration than under previous administrations, EU has also become Armenia's main primary partner in advancing democratic reforms, strengthening the rule of law, protecting human rights, deepening sectoral cooperation. But it's not only that, because, you know, there is this misperception amongst conservatives, pro-Russian circles, that, oh, EU is just giving grants to civil society and it's not doing any real projects. It's actually not true at all, because if you follow EU's activities, they are doing so much work in our border regions, in Sunik, in Vayozor, in Tavush. They have a lot of projects there supporting local communities in the most practical ways. For instance, develop small and medium enterprises to establish their businesses. And EU is also now starting to do big infrastructure projects in Sunik and other regions, which is very important. And this all is framed as EU's assistance to Armenia's resilience, which I think it's a very good way to frame it. And EU is giving a lot of money to all of this. Like, I think the amount now is 2.5 billion. But again, I'm not the best person in numbers, so I may remember wrongly.
The figure,
but I think,
no, you're right. The figure that Maragos, the EU ambassador, recently cited was 2.5 billion over several years, of course.
yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's increasing. For instance, when we met Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kallas in September, she said a new amount of money. And then before, in July, Kaja Kallas said another amount of money. So EU is assisting Armenia a lot. And it's EU is providing, from my experience, even when I was managing EU projects in other countries, which was, by the way, Gambia, my last international job, I was a key expert for EU state building project in the Gambia. So EU can either give it as a contribution to the budget of the state, and then the state decides itself how to spend it, or EU does it through projects. So it's not only about Armenia, it's the way EU operates. So budget support or projects. And So EU is doing really a lot for Armenia, and I think it's sometimes it's completely dismissed by anti-EU circles, which is so unfair.
Mm. Yes, I mean that's part of the EU's mode of action, operating through a combination of
Yeah,
policy advice, legislative advice, and projects on the ground, capacity
yeah.
building, and so on. Um, I'd
Like
like
if
to.
we return, let me say something here because I think it's important. EU mission in Armenia, observation mission. So you know that Azerbaijan launched an information warfare against this mission since its establishment. They have toned it down a little bit last few months. I think it's related to the fact that Armenia basically agreed that if the peace agreement is signed and ratified, then there will be no monitoring on the border, and this binocle monitoring on the border is not so public anymore. But this mission is so active. It's going every day to border areas like in, again, Sunik, Vayodzor, Tavush in particular. I've noticed those three. They meet people, they do a lot of human outreach. They talk to people. They do this community work. And you know, this is so important because it gives, first, it's people start to understand what means EU. And the second, it gives a perception of human security to people. I think that if not this mission, since the Jermuk invasion by Azerbaijan in September 2020, there would be a lot of migration from those regions and villages because people weren't feeling secure. But I think when EU established this mission there, people started feeling so much safer.
I think you're talking about the impact on the ground, but looking at it from the outside, the EU monitoring mission also had a major impact on the relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It stabilized the relationship. It helped to stop the attacks coming from Azerbaijan. From September 22, there were almost none. The number of people getting
Absolutely.
killed on the border, dropped.
There were some minor escalations. One in particular, I think there was only one accident in 23 March or April when I think 4 Armenian military were killed. But that was really the only one. And there were no new territorial gains, occupation by Azerbaijan. And yes, they shoot like even in March, April this year, they were shooting at civilian infrastructure in Sunik, and they harmed a house and infrastructure. But again, EU immediately released a statement which made it clear that because you know Azerbaijan was also blaming Armenia in violating ceasefire, although it was firing itself and it was trying apparently to provoke a military escalations. But EU immediately intensified its patrols even at night, and it released a statement which made it very clear that it was disinformation by Azerbaijan. And that's why exactly Azerbaijan dislikes strongly this mission, and they make up all kinds of false narratives and accusations in order to frame this mission as an undercover NATO military mission, spying on Azerbaijan, Russia, and Iran. Although this is only 200 people, civilian, monitoring, their main weapon is binocles, basically.
And they inform Azerbaijan where they're going to be in advance. So it's hardly spying.
They do.
Yes.
Yeah, which is also something that our pro-Russian opposition uses against you, saying what kind of that they were even saying, our opposition, that this mission is spying against Armenia for Azerbaijan, which is ridiculous because you know I've been an UN OSCE peacekeeper, and I know that it is a standard procedure before patrolling to notify about patrolling, especially if we are talking about unarmed civilian monitors, because you.
So I hear you. I hear
Yeah.
that the general point you're making is the EU is doing a lot, but I would like to conclude on the new partnership agenda. Is there a way we could? So there's lots of working groups, there are ongoing negotiations. Is there any way we can summarize what this agreement will mean for Armenia EU relations? Is it really an agenda, like a list of things to do in the next few years? Is that what it's going to be?
It's not an agreement, to my understanding. It's a new partnership agenda. And I outlined
A
the
to-do list.
six themes. No, it's actually both dialogue, political dialogue, security dialogue, and it's also Armenia reaching certain standards in different areas: democracy, rule of law, changing legislation. It's also about economy. It includes fields like, for instance, aviation. As you know, Armenia has been blacklisted by the European Aviation Agency in yes, in May 2020 during COVID, because it had some gaps in its aviation security standards. And once you are blacklisted, it's super difficult to get out of this blacklist. And so far, unfortunately, our airlines have no right, Armenian airlines, which are not plenty anyway, to be honest, have no right to fly to Europe. They can fly to Dubai, they can fly to various countries in Asia or Moscow or Iran, but they cannot fly to Europe. The one that flies, Fly One, it's because I think it has a Moldovan
It's
license.
Moldovan, yes.
And it's very, very bad, and it is really a problem. I actually did I also graduated executive MBA from ESCP Business School, a leading business school in Europe, France, and the world. And my final project was aviation during this period. And so we need to improve our standards in many, many different areas, including aviation. So this is just one example, and very important example.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Let's move to let's zoom out a little bit, if you like. I would like to go back on what happened in terms of the EU's policy in the past towards Armenia, and especially the Karabakh conflict. Not in the spirit of settling accounts, but in the spirit of sort of trying to understand how the EU works and what we can expect for the future. Because the sort of thing it does on the ground, civil society, helping with legislation, infrastructure, and so on, that's great and that's really important. But there are sometimes some important moments, some key moments in international relations where you need a stabilizing force. And for instance, in 22, when the EU sent the EUMA, even though that was a non-military operation, it had a major impact in terms of promoting stability and security in Armenia and in the region more generally. Now the question is: so it's great that the EU did that in 22, but it never did this kind of thing before, in spite of Armenia's requests, proposals. You might remember there were all sorts of proposals to do some monitoring on the contact line in the decades, in the 20 years before war reignited in 2020. Hang on, let me finish the question. The EU was pointedly absent from the conflict. And even, you yourself write that in 2023, even during, of course, in 2020, there was no EU intervention. It did not talk about the conflict, did not condemn the attack on Karabakh Armenians. And even in 2023, after the ethnic cleansing, the EU Council, I'm quoting you, the EU Council refrained from issuing a statement of condemnation.
It's a very important...
I can testify myself for having had many discussions with the EU over the years on what it could constructively do to move towards a solution in Karabakh. that they refused. They always stayed out of Karabakh. You know yourself that the EU's person appointed to follow the conflicts in the Caucasus, the EU special representative for the Caucasus, never went to Karabakh. None of them ever went to the Karabakh. To Karabakh. So the EU stayed out of this. And okay, that's the past. As Maragos would say, let's look to the future. But the past can be guidance
you are
to the
raising
future.
very important questions, and I would like to answer, because actually
Yes,
this is
so,
one of the topics that I have analyzed a lot. Would you like me to respond to this?
Absolutely. I'm just laying it out, making
right.
a case for there has been an EU, you would agree that there's been an unwillingness to be involved in this until 2022.
I'm going to frame it differently. Let me speak, and I will present
go for it.
So, yes, EU's role in Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict has been, first of all, it has had different stages, and second of all, it can be divided into two parts. The position in relation to Nagorno-Karabakh issue, and the position for Armenia's sovereignty and security issue. These have been very different. So to go back to Nagorno-Karabakh, EU wasn't involved in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in any way until 2022, simply because it was considered the prerogative of the OSCE. So when the 2020 war exploded, EU didn't feel like it had a mandate to do anything about it. Yes, it had the representative for the conflict, which was not for the conflict specifically, but it was for the South Caucasus, including Georgia. But he was more involved in Georgian conflict because there was this format of Geneva talks that EU was facilitating between Russia and Georgia, as well as there was already an EU mission in Georgia, as you know. However, I think first our government was still not considering the possibility of EU CSDP mission in Armenia, simply because it didn't even cross anybody's mind. And I have to say proudly that I am one of 4 civil society / expert community representatives in Armenia who promoted this idea to both the authorities and the EU in 2022. Because our authorities were more thinking amongst the lines of the OSCE peacekeeping mission, which, by the way, has not really happened anyway in that sense, classical sense of peacekeeping, and also UN peacekeeping, which has become a rocket science because of the geopoliticization of Security Council and the role of the veto power of Russia and other states. And we know that when Nagorno-Karabakh conflict had all these crises up to final ethnic cleansing, it didn't even produce any statement because it was simply impossible because of the politics and geopolitics. As for EU, yes. So basically, it got more involved in 2022-23 gradually after Azerbaijan actually delegitimized completely the OSCE Minsk group. And especially after the war in Ukraine started, it was impossible to have any dialogue between OSCE Minsk group co-chairs, Russia, France, and US. And that's
the Minsk group that was supposed to be negotiating peace in Karabakh.
Yes. And, you know, that's when actually President Macron, together with Charles Michel, it was December 2020, I think, or 21, actually, 21, when they facilitated this first. So the first one was by Zoom, by the way, because it was still COVID meeting. And then, of course, Azerbaijan did everything to get rid of France for obvious reasons, because it was considering France pro-Armenian. but then it kind of enjoyed EU's involvement because EU was quite soft. We cannot avoid this criticism that throughout 22 EU and 23 EU was still doing this liberal peace soft policy, which doesn't really work much with autocrats like Azerbaijan. And yes, we can criticize certain aspects of it. And EU, what is EU?
I'm not trying to make you side with the critics of the EU. I am trying to understand, to analyze with you the different elements, which means that the EU failed in its mission to civilize its periphery, to promote the rule of law in its periphery, because the EU did fail. I think that's unquestionable in the area. You say part of the reason is that the Armenian government was counting on the OSCE and never thought of addressing the EU for these things. Is there not? Let me put on the table a few other possible explanations. First, decision-making format in the EU. You need consensus for this sort of thing in the EU Council, and there are some member states, not to mention Hungary, that can block. So you need just one member state to block an entire initiative. There is a problem with majority voting in general. Maybe there's the problem with the Caucasus just not being sufficiently important. Maybe the EU doesn't necessarily perceive its interests in the Caucasus. Maybe you have other responses.
When we as civil society representatives started promoting the idea of EU ESCP mission in Armenia, then there were many journalists or civil society representatives, Eurosceptic ones, who were telling us, EU will never ever come to work in Armenia because who cares about Armenia in the EU? Who will send its citizens to work in a mission in Armenia? And when I heard it, I was astonished. I said, listen,
That's a famous Armenian self-fulfilling prophecies, aren't they? We're not important, so let's not bring it up.
I was like, listen, I was working in Central African Republic and EU had a mission there. I was closely collaborating. Why do you think that EU citizens will go to work in Central African Republic, but they will not come to Armenia? Of course they will come. And I know that EU staff who works in Armenia, they totally enjoy it. They love working in Armenia. But just returning to politics, you are right. EU needs to make all these decisions, take all these decisions by consensus. And, EU is not a person. It's not one high-ranking official. It's not the EU Secretariat. First, if you compare statements and behaviors of different high-ranking EU officials, they are not the same. Each EU high-ranking official is coming from a different country. Each of them has their personal style, their personality. It does affect, like when we had this terrible nightmare year, 2023, during the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, leading to ethnic cleansing, if you follow the statements of, let's say, Charles Michel and Josep Borrell, they had completely different styles of addressing what was happening in Nagorno-Karabakh. And we can say that Josep Borrell was very principled. And it was him who made a quite strong statement criticizing Azerbaijan after the September 23 military offensive. And why it was coming from him? Because EU didn't have a consensus to make it as an official statement on behalf of the Council of the European Union, because countries like Hungary would veto it. And it wasn't only Hungary. It was, I guess, we're talking about at least 3 countries who would not, approve this kind of statement. That's why Josep Borrell made it on his behalf.
Which were the other 2?
I think the second would be perhaps Italy, which has a very strong trade cooperation with Azerbaijan.
And gas coming from Azerbaijan.
Yes, and it's a number one trade partner of Azerbaijan in the EU. And as you know, it has even procured Leonardos to Azerbaijan, but it was also, I think, Slovakia. So there were at least three countries, I would say. And, the statement coming from a high-ranking EU official, even if it's High Commissioner Josep Borrell, is very appreciated, but it doesn't have the same value as a condemnation on behalf of Council of European Union. Unfortunately, we have to face it. So EU has these institutional restrictions, and then yes, it does have dependency on Azerbaijani gas, even if many analysts have analyzed that even if Azerbaijan, as their analysts insist, doesn't export some of the Russian gas with its own gas to EU, at least it receives Russian gas based on its agreements with Gazprom signed in 2022. At least it uses Russian gas to meet its domestic consumption in order to be able to export gas to Europe. Otherwise, it would not be able to meet its commitment. And of course, EU knows it. But, why I have named my article about normative values and pragmatism. I think this is a very important point, because EU has been trying to balance its normative power, its commitment to human rights and democracy, which in this case would mean support for Armenia's democracy and human rights, and its geopolitical interests, cooperating with Azerbaijan and other countries that are not democracies, that are autocracies, but they have natural resources or power. And to be very honest with you, I think that this pragmatism is now kind of mutual. Why? Because if last year Armenia had adopted very confrontational position towards Russia and criticizing and exchanging those very aggressive antagonistic statements, Russia and Armenia, this year it has changed, if you noticed, because Armenia has announced that it is conducting balanced and balancing foreign policy, which means that Armenian Prime Minister and other officials go to Moscow. We even had Foreign Minister Lavrov visiting Armenia, which hadn't happened in 2-3 years. And of course, this may not look good to EU circles. However, this is Armenia's pragmatism. If an EU official goes to Baku and calls Azerbaijan a reliable partner and shakes President Aliyev's hand, of course we don't like it. In a similar way, EU most likely doesn't like it when our Prime Minister goes to Moscow, shakes Russia's President Putin's hand. But I think that we have reached a point of understanding between the EU and Armenia when there is a kind of mutual pragmatism. So both sides understand that the other side has to do it for pragmatic security or geopolitical reasons.
Okay, we haven't completely exhausted the subject, but thank you very much for that very full answer. I'd like to move to an entirely different subject. We've talked about Russia, United Emirates, the EU a lot, India. There's been in July, the Armenian Prime Minister, July or August rather, the Armenian Prime Minister went to the summit of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And that's a new development in this whole. I mean, you were talking just now of Armenia balancing pragmatically between its different partners. So where does the Shanghai Cooperation Organization come into this? Is Armenia going to join, or has it applied to join? And is that going to upset its other partners?
Yeah, I'm going to have an article published on this topic tomorrow. So this was the last day of August, first day of September, this summit to which Prime Minister Pashinyan went. The application was submitted still in July, and our application failed. The reason it failed is well known. Even if Armenia established finally diplomatic relations with Pakistan, it was the last country in the world that didn't even recognize Armenia as an independent country until the 1st of September. So I think this was aimed at two purposes. First, to have normal diplomatic relations with every country, not to have like enemies. The second, in order not to have a veto, Pakistan to veto Armenian application in Shanghai Cooperation Treaty, but it was vetoed. The reason it was vetoed because Azerbaijan's president made anti-Indian statements showing its absolute support for Pakistan, and you know that Pakistan has become one of the main. It has always been Azerbaijan's very strong political and military supporter, and it has just procured a combat statecraft produced jointly by Pakistan and China. And so Azerbaijan expressed its explicit support for Pakistan in Pakistan-India conflict, and as a result, India blocked Azerbaijan's application, and as a reaction, Pakistan blocked Armenians. So it was.
So we were collateral damage.
Right. And as of now, after that, it's not clear, and there is no any discussion in Armenia any longer, whether Armenia is going to continue to aspire to membership in this organization, or it's going to give up and think that it's not important. But let's discuss what is this organization. So it can look like mini BRICS because some of its members are the same as those of BRICS. And you know that BRICS is positioning itself as a kind of an alternative polar to Euro-Atlantic bloc, both ideologically and also in terms of global economic governance organization. However, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, by the way, mentions even security and defense in its level, it doesn't have the same scope. Armenia could never be a BRICS member for a simple reason, because BRICS, first of all, it is too ideological, anti-Western. Second, because it admits only global economies. You need to be a really major economic power in order to be a member of BRICS. BRICS has actually stopped its enlargement because it has received too many applications and now is revising the criteria. Meanwhile, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a smaller organization, and it has
and it's defined continentally. It's the Eurasian continent, isn't it?
Yeah, only in Eurasia. It doesn't have, let's say, Brazil or South Africa. At the same time, it is a very loose organization. So it's not a customs union. It's not a collective defensive organization. It's more like a platform.
Like the G7 or the G20.
Yeah, for regional cooperation and for diplomatic engagement. And I think what attracts Armenia most in this organization is, again, the opportunities for deblocking communications, for like being connected to a Eurasian communications. And so it doesn't have any heavy obligations or strict criteria for members. The aspect that is criticized for our radical pro-Western actors, they are saying, oh, our membership shows that Armenia is not serious, Armenian authorities, about EU membership aspirations. They still go to the East, to Russia and other states which are not democratic. Most of them are autocratic, and you have the same members of Eurasian Economic Union or collective security treaty organizations, most of them in this organization. It's true. But first of all, here you have also other states. Most importantly for us, India and China, with whom we have huge opportunities to explore. Second of all, again, it's not a customs union, it's a very loose cooperation without mutual obligations. So I think for Armenia, this is an important platform to advance its relations with China, India, and states like that, and Kazakhstan, which has become the member of CSTO and Eurasian Economic Union, with which Armenia has been advancing very close relationship in the last couple of years.
Is
and
that
now
so?
they are,
Kazakhstan.
yes. So we have very positive dynamics with Kazakhstan, unlike, let's say, Uzbekistan, with which we have almost no relationship. But now things are changing. Like there are different bilateral and multilateral formats within in which like both the governments and think tanks participate. Like last week there were new announcements about some new routes between Kazakhstan, Iran, Armenia, and even involving Uzbekistan, which is something completely new, as well as Turkmenistan. So this is very much aimed at deblocking communications, and potentially going back to the EU, this is also kind of complementary to Armenia's ambition, very much supported by the European Union, to become part of the middle corridor.
Right. Yeah.
And which will also give us access to the Black Sea. And you mentioned in your introduction Black Sea Initiative. So we absolutely need these deblocking communications and become part of all those like Global Gateway Initiative by the EU, Black Sea format, and Middle East corridor. As you know, EU Commission, European Commission President Madame von der Leyen stated in Tashkent in April that borders should be deblocked, Armenian borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey, and Armenia can become part of Middle Corridor Initiative. To which President Aliyev reacted in a very nervous way, accusing EU as usual in neocolonialism and external foreign intervention, and saying that basically dismissing this idea. But now Azerbaijan cannot continue to behave like that, because the only actor of which Azerbaijan cannot completely dismiss and is cautious with is US President Trump, and it brokered this trip Trump wrote for peace and prosperity in Washington, D.C. in August. And this creates a basis indeed for reciprocal and not so-called as our opposition is claiming, or as even Mr. Aliyev continues to claim even in UN General Assembly. It's not the Zangezur corridor. It's something completely different. It's more in line with Armenia's Crossroads of road, and hopefully it will really allow us to become part of Middle Corridor and Global Gateway, deblocking communications in the region.
Right. Sossi, thank you very much. This, I'm afraid, is all we have time for. This has been a fascinating insight into Armenia's complicated calculations. The EU-Armenia relationship is just one of the dimensions in Armenia's foreign policy, an important one, maybe civilizationally particularly significant, but it's just you emphasize your interest in the European Union is among the pragmatic pro-European stance, and you contrast it with a more radical, more idealistic or enthusiastic, uncompromising EU stance. You emphasize that nowadays Armenia's external relations themselves are not just in complementarity, but pragmatic. So you need to manage, you talked about a softening of the rhetoric towards Russia, interest in the in the SCO and so on. I think that gives us a very complete and contrasting picture of EU-Armenia relations. I'm very grateful to you for this. I'd like to remind our listeners that if they want to find out more, they can go to your articles on EVN in particular, the website EVN that is published in Armenia. There's one article in May on EU-Armenian relations at a crossroads. There is one that's about to come out on Armenia and the SCO in particular. Thank you very much, Sossi.
Thank you very much.
And to our listeners, we look forward to seeing you again for the next program very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.